some pretty cool people. So we have 4 speakers here to talk to you guys about their experiences working at some pretty prestigious companies, like Google, Instacart, IBM, and Ford. And I know that they've also worked at other companies, and maybe they can get into their experiences at other companies they've worked at. And basically, Layla and I are going to be going back and forth, asking them questions related to their experiences at these companies. And hopefully by the end of the event, you guys get some more insight of what it's like working at these companies, and also like some more insight of what it takes to get into companies like this. So we have an agenda that we'll go over.
Yeah, sure. So today we're gonna introduce each of our panelists, and we'll have some questions prepared. If you all look into the chat, there is a Q&A section. So there should be 3 categories for the chat box: general, Q&A, and DMs. So if you can all just direct your questions to the Q&A section, it'll be easier for us to facilitate it during the event. And any general questions, if it's not specific or related to a speaker or today's panel, then feel free to put that in there. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're having some issues with the breakout room, so I'll be trying to troubleshoot that in the background. But for the meantime, we'll try to leave each question for 10 to 15 minutes, hopefully. We can go in order of the speakers, or if someone wants to volunteer a question, then we can do it that way. Sierra, can you hear us okay now? Okay, Miranda can hear us. Sierra, you might want to leave and join back. So we are recording this session for anyone who misses it. You can find this on our YouTube channel through the link. So I think we're all set.
I think we're good. Yeah. So I guess we'll just go through. We'll give each speaker like a short time to just introduce themselves and talk about what they do and what company they work for. So first is Quinn. So.
Hey, sorry. Can you guys hear me? I'm not able to get my camera working. I will play with that in a minute.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
No worries.
My name is Quinn Perfetto. As you can see on this slide here, I'm a senior software engineer. I work at Google, and I graduated from the computer science program at University of Windsor.
All right, thanks so much.
Next is Eric.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Eric. I'm a mid-level software engineer at Instacart. Before this, I only joined a few months ago. I was at Shopify, and I also did a few internships at Google, GitHub, and Shopify. So it's great to see everyone.
All right, thank you. Our next is Simon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I graduated from the MAD program, like some of you must be in right now. And after that, I worked at a few places in Windsor, some local shops, and now I'm at Ford in Dearborn, Michigan, across the border every day.
All right, thank you. And then our last one is Michael.
Hello, hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm not exactly home right now. Cool little makeshift setup I have here. So hello everyone, I'm Michael. As you see, I'm a DB2 developer intern, so I work in backend development. I am a final year student at McMaster University, and I've in the past done talks and different events on behalf of IBM, specifically on landing internships and having solid resumes. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, everyone. We're excited to have all of our speakers here today. And if you want, Nathan, you can get started with the first question.
Yeah, so tell us about your position at your company and what do you do? What are your day-to-day responsibilities? Kind of worded that wrong, but I guess we can start in the order that you guys introduced yourselves. So Quinn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sorry, I can't get my camera working, so you guys are just gonna have to trust how I look here on my picture. Okay. I'm not catfishing you. So I work on a team called People Ranking and Discovery at Google. And so we're sort of responsible for solving the people autocomplete and people suggestion problem, kind of full stack at Google. So one example of like where our is like when you go to send somebody an email and it suggests people who to send that email to. That's sort of an example of our people autocomplete. And similarly, like when you click share on a photo in Google Photos and it shows you a list of people who you might want to share that photo with, those suggestions also come from us. And so we own sort of like the UI down to the backend ranking layer for that system. As far as my day-to-day responsibilities, in the morning, I usually try and sort of like do things that enable my team to get work done. So I try and sort of like address my email inbox, do code reviews, do sort of design reviews, kind of like make day-to-day decisions that need to be made. And then after lunch, later in the day, I sort of try and work on like personal things like, coding or like writing my own design docs, and still kind of address some of those other things, but it's kind of more like interrupt based usually at the end of the day and not me sort of like seeking those things out.
Okay. And then Eric, do you want to go? Thank you, Quinn.
So I work on the platform team at Instacart. We're responsible for the platform in which our engineers work. So our job is kind of developing tools to make the other engineers at our company more productive as well, and kind of streamline that process. So so most of my day as a mid-level engineer is mostly spent like planning and coding, mostly planning really. But yeah, I usually just start my day with the usual stand-up, talk to everybody on our team, see what we're doing for the day, work for an hour, have some lunch, slack off for another half hour, and then so mostly just coding, talking to like other developers to see how we can improve their experience and stuff like that, talking with stakeholders and projects. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And then next we can do Simon.
Yeah, so currently I'm working on the Ford performance team. What they do is whenever there's like a performance Ford vehicle, usually they get like their own special app. So they did the Ford GT prior to me coming onto the team, and then right now we're building a application for the Bronco. So if you buy a Bronco, you get a special app, and so my day to day starts out with a stand up like that, and then there's a lot of interaction between like service providers. Like we have a few SDKs that are custom tailored to us, and they're building it alongside us. So there's a lot of communication with that team, and then there's a lot of internal communication. Our APIs are all handled internally and stuff like that. So you're constantly in a meeting trying to like figure something out and get down to the solution. A lot of that with design as well, and then whenever I'm not doing that, it's coding in Android.
Okay, thank you. And then last one is Michael.
Yep. So as I mentioned before, I'm back-end developer. I'm on the DB2 team. Unfortunately, due to the nature of what I do, I can't really say too much besides I'm on the DB2 team. So a lot of what I do is really just a balance between meetings and calls or with different stakeholders and the different people in the team at large, but also a lot of writing code, fixing bugs, especially. I specifically deal with memory and cache related bugs. So talking with other developers, trying to figure out, when we hit certain bugs, how do we approach the solution in terms of, do we want to just patch something and prevent something from being done, or do we want to actually support something that can be like a feature, for example? So working with developers, writing code, fixing bugs is most of it, and then every now and then I do have those stakeholder meetings and meetings with the team at large to figure out what areas we're going next.
All right, thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And Layla, if you want to get the
Yeah,
next
sure.
question.
So if anyone has any questions during this time specific to anything that the speakers have said so far, feel free to put it in the Q&A section or the general, and then we'll keep track of it as we go. So we can move on to the next question. And I know some people get this question a lot. So what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind when creating a resume? You can talk a little bit about some things that recruiters have told you in the past, or maybe you want to go over some mistakes that you found. This can be kind of a discussion. We don't have to have it too structured. So whoever wants to volunteer and answer, go ahead, and then we'll go around.
I can start.
Cool.
One good tip is to know your audience. So if it's a large company, which most of us, I think here, all of us work at pretty large companies, these recruiters are going through hundreds of applications a day individually. As a company, thousands. So they're really like, there was a statistic, I think, oh, dog is in the room. There's a statistic, I think it was done by Google, where like the recruiter looks at your resume for an average of like 11 seconds before deciding. So if, for example, if you're applying to a large company like this, you should keep your resume short and simple. One page is kind of like the golden rule in tech, especially. But yeah, just know your audience, adjust your resume to the job posting. You know, if it's a back-end position working with Rails, for example, and you have experience with that, highlight those projects first and that experience first.
Yeah, I would probably say something similar to what Eric said, which is kind of like, in general, you should assume that somebody non-technical is going to be looking at your resume first. And so like, if you have a bunch of sort of like acronyms and nitty gritty details and stuff like that, it probably won't resonate super well with the person who's like screening your resume. And like Eric said, like in 11 seconds, they're not going to learn like, I'll pick on Michael here because this is the first acronym, but DB2, like if you just write DB2, a recruiter at Google is going to be like, I don't know what that is. Why, what makes this person so special? You know? No, sorry, Michael. But so I think focus more on sort of like the like quantifiable end result of your work, because that's something that sort of like a non-technical person can maybe resonate with a little bit more. Like, you know, I reduced the time to onboard to a database system at IBM by 50% or something like that. And that's something that they'll probably understand more in that 11 seconds.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to jump in there as well, because I think what both Quinn and Eric said is a perfect combination of what I was going to say. When someone looks at your resume, they're spending, as was said, 11 seconds, about 15 seconds. And if you're incredibly lucky, if you have them hooked, they'll spend 30 seconds on your resume. Incredibly rare, you shouldn't bank on it. But the idea is they're spending so little time on your resume, you have to, as was mentioned, you can't just use a bunch of acronyms left, right, and center. You have to quantify what it is you're doing, and you need to make it as simple to read as possible. I've seen some resumes where I will read a line and I'll be scratching my head like, what does this mean? I don't have the time to sit there and interpret it if I'm only spending 11 seconds on your resume. It needs to be, like I like to say, third grade reading level. It needs to be third grade. Read the sentence, explain it as it is. And I think it's very important to keep that statistic in mind. 11 to 15 seconds is what you're looking at. And so it needs to be simple. It needs to be straight to the point. And also it needs to quantify what you do. If I say I was a software developer at Cineplex, for example, and I said things like I fixed code, I wrote more code, I had code review. These are all things a developer already does. You're not really telling me anything about your position that I can't just go on Google and figure out. So you need to quantify the things that you've done, as like fix security vulnerabilities, increase testing capabilities by X%, by Y usage value. And so that way they can see the impact that you have on the team. And that's very important. That's what they're looking for. A recruiter might not know the difference between HTML and CSS, but they will understand that you increase efficiency by 20% or boosted the user experience by 10% or anything along those lines, for sure.
I agree completely. A lot of what I wanted to say was already said. I think a good like synopsis is like just bubble. Like generally, I keep the same information on my resume, but I bubble up the more relevant points. So the first points are exact. Like if I'm going for an Android position, I emphasize Android rather than the other work I might have done at a company. And like Michael said, the straight to the point thing, I think it's like super easy. It's like fluffing up a point, kind of like padding it, and then it's almost off-putting, to be honest with you. So I think that like straight to the point, and don't try to make something small. Like don't make a mountain out of a molehill. I think is like a really good rule.
No bodies of text, just bullet points on the resume.
Yeah, I think those were all some really great points. We had some specific questions here that I think would make sense to address. So someone has a question for Eric, but I think anyone can just chime in. So would making resumes for specific job postings work as well? So let's say if you're applying to more than one job, one being front-end web development, mobile application, and the other being game dev or software development, would it make sense to have different resumes for each position?
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much the point I'm trying to make, is to tailor your resume for every position that you're applying to if you're really serious about them. So, given your example, if it's a web developer position, like we mentioned, highlight your experience with that, your projects. If you have them, definitely have them there at the top if you can. So definitely tailor your resume to those postings. And if for example it's a backend developer position and it says they work with Ruby on Rails and all these different technical terms will usually be listed in a job posting. Don't be afraid to mention those words because they're looking to match it. Recruiters are looking at this job posting and they're looking at the resume and they're matching words. So yeah.
To add on to that, absolutely tailoring your resume is key, but a lot of people also forget that it's okay to leave in the little things that make you unique. For example, if you're on a sports team, like a volleyball team, for example, some people think, well, I'm trying to get a job in tech. I don't need that. But I know some IBM recruiters who will tell you they read that and they see that shows your ability to work as a team. And I think absolutely tailor your resume. If you have a lot of front end experience, for example, with projects, you want to list those if you're using your front end resume versus if you had some like compiler work level projects, and keep in those things that make you unique. I know in my LinkedIn bio, for example, I say, I'm a developer, I'm a student, but also I'm a huge fan of How I Met Your Mother. That's in my LinkedIn bio. And I've actually had a recruiter reach out to me and then also say she's a huge fan of How I Met Your Mother, quote the show, and then say, we'd be interested if you could, go here for an application process, things like that. So keep the things that make you unique. Definitely tailor the things like the experience in the project. But when it comes to extracurriculars or even hobbies, those aren't really things you want to aim to tailor. You want to use extracurriculars and use hobbies to show who you are outside of this specific position you're trying to apply to, for sure.
I also want to add, I think if you have 3 resumes, something that should be like common on all 3 is some soft, like if you have a soft skills sketch section, or you talk about your soft skills. I think communication-based skills are like the best. Um, I noticed I get a lot of hits and a lot of questions about like I've done some public speaking and some pitch events and won hackathons and stuff like that. And recruiters really attach to those things because I think a developer that with communication skills that's like maybe average is still way better than like a really good developer that you can't talk to or work with. And I think that a lot of recruiters and a lot of businesses are looking for people that are like well balanced.
Yeah, those are some great points. Thank you, everyone, for answering that. Just one final question here. It can be a hard yes or no, or if you'd like to elaborate a bit more. 2-page resumes. What are your thoughts? Oh, we're getting a no from Eric.
Okay, I wouldn't say it's a hard no. I think like it depends. If it's a really small company where they don't get a lot of applications, they really want to know a lot about you, and having all that information is great. So I think it really depends on the situation. If it's a huge company, like Google, for example, I would say 1 page, and I've been told that specifically from my recruiter at Google. So I think it depends on the situation.
I think the recruiters at Google generally say 1 page for every 5 years. So if you've been working for less than 10 years, you can probably do with 1 page.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the 1 page rule because what ends up happening is a lot of people add information that is very unnecessary. I personally have a 2-page resume, but I always tell people don't do it, don't follow that. And the reason, sort of my excuse for it, is because I know I just said IBM developer, but I've actually done 5 different internships at IBM, and like that alone takes up a majority of my first page. And so I know once I enter the full-time workplace, then I can remove those internships. My resume will be back to 1 page. But for now, I feel like I'm in this personal spot where that is all very relevant experience, especially if I'm looking at full-time jobs at IBM. Having all those IBM internships would be useful to display. So I'm in a position where I say, I feel like I have a bit of an excuse because everything else is really short. Education, skills, it's all really short, very few lines. But once I start working full-time, I know, okay, 2-page resume when you have 1 or 2 years of like full-time experience is 2 pages is way too long. And that's a little thing that people usually don't mention is when the position says, for example, 1 to 2 years of experience, they usually don't count internship experience. So that can be very tricky as well. So I know down the road, I need a 1-page resume, but I think there can be a use case set for 2 pages. I think it's very rare. I've never recommended 2 pages to anyone's resume I looked at.
All right, so I think it's a no all around.
Yeah.
So we can move on to the next question if Nathan, you want to.
Yeah, so what was the interview process like for the position you're in right now? And I'm not sure. Yeah, Michael, if you want to start.
Okay. So at IBM, when you send in your application, they usually send you a cognitive assessment, which is just to test cognitive ability. And then they also send you a coding question if you're applying for a developer role. And the coding assessment is really like a Leet Code HackerRank style. So once you do that, HR can see the code you wrote, they see the results. And so the interview, what I found from my experience, never really seems to be too technical. There usually is a technical side of it, but if they ask me to write code, it's always been relatively easy. And usually they'd focus more on conceptual things. Like if you had 2 threads that wanted to access the same piece of memory, how would you do it to make sure it's safe and things like that? And so they're not asking me to code this, they're asking me this conceptually. So my interview processes are usually, you get on the call, you introduce yourself, give your elevator pitch, and they ask a lot of questions to understand how well of a person you fit into this team. So for example, I've had the question, what's one piece of software you really like, one piece of software you really hate, and why? And they're trying to get an understanding of your approach to things outside of your ability to purely write code. So they're looking for someone who's outgoing, looking for a problem solver. And then they say, well, if we want to see how you can code, we've seen the coding assessment. So maybe we can ask you some questions that might be a bit more relevant to what it is we do and see if you already understand these principles, because they can't incorporate, okay, this person needs to know multi-threading in a coding assessment. And in assessments, you can do any language as well. So they may want to test you on knowledge of a specific language, for example. So it's definitely always been get to know who you are as a person, what's your personality type like, and then also then there's the assessment part where they ask you a few technical questions. It's never really been, okay, hi, welcome, now start coding. I have never really had to code in front of people except for one of my few interviews.
Yeah, I think this is one of those questions where you're just going to see so many different answers because every company is different. So I can give my experience. Like for full-time jobs at the bigger companies, they all kind of have this new standard process. So this is the same at Facebook, Google, Instacart. Pretty much anywhere I've interviewed for full-time. There was one technical phone screen interview where you're coding usually like on a coder pad or something where they can kind of see your editor. And sometimes they're more like some of you might be familiar with Leet Code. They're very like algorithmic data structure questions and almost like puzzles. They can be difficult, but a lot of them will do questions sort of like that. Some of them are shifting more towards practical questions, which is good. Some things you might see even in a school project. So usually there's like a phone screen, and then there's, 1 or 2, if you pass that phone screen, then they take you to the on-site interviews, which during normal times, they might take you to the office, fly you in. But lately, of course, they're doing those all virtually. But for the on-site interviews, it's usually like 1 or 2 more coding questions or interviews. And depending on how senior you are, so once you start moving past the new grad level, there's also system design interviews, which I just had to do 3 of those at 3 different companies in the past few months. And those are more like designing entire systems and scalable systems. Those are actually really cool. And then usually there's a behavioral interview in the mix there as well. For internships, it's usually a lot shorter, 1 phone interview, maybe another technical interview after that. It all really depends though.
And typically, if you are like converting from an intern to a full-time employee at the same company, there's like a bit of an expedited process. So like at Google, you usually have to do basically what Eric just described, where they fly you in and you do like 5 back-to-back meetings with 5 different people, and they like grill you for an hour each. But when you're converting from an intern, you just have to do 2 sort of more lax conversion interviews, and they sort of heavily factor in the feedback that you got over your like 3 or 4 months of working there. And so it's not quite as high stakes in the interview It's basically they're just checking if there was like, you know, a false positive or something like that in your original interviews. So like it pays off to do these internships because the conversion process is a lot less stressful.
For sure. And even at a lot of companies, there wouldn't even be like conversion interviews or even just a simple chat with your manager about converting too. So yeah, it's definitely like your key to the door.
Yeah, I had similar interview experience to the sort of like 4-stage interview, but for Ford in particular, it was like a hacker rank assessment, basically like take home homework. You just have to hit a certain standard, and then the better you do, the more interested they are. And then there's just like a general meeting interview, and then like a behavioral interview. Like I said, I think every company's kind of big on the behavioral interview at this point, even though the interview styles kind of vary at this point. But yeah, that was it for that one. No real showing of past projects or anything like that. Just nail your interview.
Okay. I guess we can answer, if you guys want to answer some of these questions in the chat.
We can keep the ones that maybe aren't so related to the interview process for a bit later, but we have one here. How to prepare maybe for behavioral interviews, which I think is a question coming up. So maybe we should save that. Actually, we'll hold on. Let me see if there's anything in the Q&A. I don't know, Nathan, do you see anything that stands out that?
Did you see this one? Do you feel you feel having students who take internships are more appealing than students with just a diploma? Also, what also makes one person stand out from another?
Yeah, I mean, basically when you're a new grad from school, yeah, everybody's going to have the diploma, but only a certain number of people will have working experience, and that kind of gives you the edge over most people. A lot of people will not graduate with any experience, whereas someone like Michael, I don't know if you're a student still, but you've done 6 internships at IBM. This guy's got 2 years of experience, and finishing school with that, he's going to have that huge advantage over any other new grad applying to these jobs. So yeah, taking internships is definitely, people with internships is definitely more appealing than people without. It's given work experience. So yeah.
Okay. We can say
I'd say it's probably the most important thing, to be honest with you. Like if you have 3 internships on your resume, I don't think they're going to look at your GPA or anything. They're just going to say like, did this person pass or not? And then that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe we can save some of these questions up until the end, because it seems like some of them aren't related to the first question. But we can just go with the next question now.
Yeah, so I think now we can kind of branch into the different, I think some people may have already touched on this, but we can talk about how to advise people, or how you would recommend any preparation skills, how to prepare for technical interviews. So things that you maybe have done yourself, or things that you think other people would benefit from.
So
sorry, Mike, but you got it.
No, go ahead.
The canonical advice I feel like that I hear a lot of people give is just sort of like grind LeetCode, which I think has some merit. But what I usually add to that is like, I think understanding the sort of like fundamentals and the core concepts behind the sort of like grinding of LeetCode is important. Because I see a lot of people who just kind of strictly grind LeetCode and try and memorize like those questions and those answers. And as soon as like there's a small variation on a question or a slightly different question, it's sort of like a crash and burn. And then like in the interview, they're trying to like copy and paste what they did in LeetCode, and it's kind of a disaster. So yeah, I would just say like, make sure that you're not doing that, and you're sort of like taking the time to like understand the underlying sort of algorithms.
to add to that, I definitely, we've all heard, grind leak code. And I say, while doing leak code problems is a good start, there is, as Quinn said, a lot to take away from it with understanding the problem. But I would also add making sure your solutions make sense, not from a, so one of the issues with leak code is that they really only check how fast your program actually runs, and that's it. But you should know a good developer isn't about how fast they can make every program. I know one of my managers, for example, is very strict on writing clean code. And he was one of the people that was interviewing me when I had my technical interview. So you don't even know if the person, behind the screen is actually paying attention to how clean your code actually is. And do your variable names make sense? Are you using, I've had PRs where I would, I'd upload my code and say, here's this bug, it's fixed. And the manager would come back and be like, can you add a blank line between these two lines right here? Because we want the code to look clean. So when you do leak code problems, don't just try to go for the fastest solution. Go for a solution you can explain well. Make sure you understand the problem, as Quinn said. But I'd also add, make sure you're writing nice, clean code, easy to read, follows the style guide, because you never know if the person interviewing you cares about that stuff. Especially if when you're doing the interview, they want to understand the answer you're making. So you want your code to be easy to read. And maybe they don't care about that and you just end up being good at writing clean code. But if they do care about that, if they do care about, okay, is this person using comments, or do they separate their code into blocks and things like that, then it would look very nice to have that. Because a lot of people who write leak code problems, they don't care about writing clean code. They just care about writing, 100% faster than everyone, 0 milliseconds. But make sure it is actually readable is a big one.
I agree. Sorry, you go.
No, go ahead. I was just saying that's a great point.
Yeah, so I think in a lot of my interviews, clean code has been completely emphasized. So I totally agree with Michael there. And to build off of what Quinn said, leak code isn't the end all be all, and it seems like everyone kind of gives you that answer like at first. And what I realized when I dove into it and really took interviewing seriously after I gained some experience in the field was that, like, generally, especially the questions you kind of get asked in an interview, which aren't usually like the top level leak code hard questions, like all algorithms almost follow a pattern. Like it's usually something like a recursive answer, or like a double pointer, something like I find the words kind of like are meant to throw you off, but it's usually always generally the same approach, or understanding a data type. So I think if you go back to fundamentals, like Quinn said, and just really understand all those concepts individually, then once you do start grinding on leak code, everything makes more sense and you just do a better job.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with everything everyone just said. Fundamentals are the most important, because if you don't understand the fundamentals, you'll just find yourself memorizing leak code answers and not actually understanding it. So when the time comes, you're just going to choke. So I think, like, for technical interviews, especially the algorithmic ones, know your fundamentals first. A great resource after that I would check out is Cracking the Coding Interview. It's a very popular book, and it's that transition between the fundamentals and these crazy algorithm questions, where there are a ton of examples of technical questions there, but they also kind of go over how do you communicate your solution in these interviews. How do you talk? I mean, there's even sections on like the behavioral part of interviews. So this is a great resource. I think a lot of people recommend it. I know Quinn recommended it to me when I was a student. So that's a great resource. And then after that, if you know all your fundamentals, you're confident in your ability to interview properly, leak code is definitely helpful to practice. And then I guess one other piece of advice I would give is to try to do mock interviews. So get together with your friends, other students. It might even be better to do it with people you don't know that well and that you're nervous around. You're nervous about getting the answer wrong, because that's exactly how you're going to feel when you're in an interview. So practice with your friends. Have one person be the interviewer, one be the candidate, and take turns. And that'll help you in that situation, because especially until you've done a few interviews, you're not going to be prepared for what's gonna go on in that process until you do it.
Those are some very great points, and we have some interview specific questions here. Maybe we can go over a couple of them if one person wants to take them in the interest of time, whoever wants to volunteer an answer. So we have one here from Niche, do you think system design interviews are becoming part of fresher full-time job interviews? And how should we prepare for system design interviews?
Yeah, I can answer that because I've done a bunch in the last few months because I just switched jobs. And it was the first time doing that. So I think system design is more focused for more experienced engineers. So I think as a new grad or an intern especially, you're very unlikely to get those sorts of questions. But as I transition from new grad to mid-level, and definitely at senior, you're going to get system design questions at most of the big standard process companies. I think that they're really fun interviews because they're a lot more relatable to the kind of work you actually do. You're planning and designing these different systems rather than solving some crazy algorithm puzzle. And my best advice for studying those is look up a resource. I just saw it in a PDF. I don't know if it's an actual book, but it's called Grokking the System Design Interview. And that helped me nail all of them. And it's a pretty quick resource. And then after that, just looking at like YouTube videos of different system design interviews really helped me. And one more important thing about that, I think these are very common. These system design interviews kind of really decide the level you're joining at a lot of companies. So, with the algorithm questions, there's only so much room for to really show your experience. There's usually, a few possible solutions. Most people will get them regardless of your experience. But system design interviews really show how much experience you have, how good you are at building scalable systems, for example, and systems architecture. So these interviews kind of decide if you're on the borderline at your current company as a mid-level or senior engineer, these ones will decide what you're going to get hired at very often.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think that was a great answer. And then we have just another general question. Sorry. Will it depend on the company whether in the interview the questions will be more concentrated on DSA or technologies for development? So if anyone wants to give an answer about that. So if it's more concentrated on DSA or tech.
And for those wondering, DSA is data structures and algorithms.
Yeah. Any,
nobody else wants to answer. I'll
go. Go ahead.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the company. So I think there was one question where I was going to mention this point, but if you have an interview with a certain company, a great resource is Glassdoor, where people will post reviews of that company, and there's also a whole section about interviews, so people will post their experience interviewing with these companies. And you can kind of go on there and see what kind of questions they ask, what style. If it's a bigger companies, it's definitely easy to find out what kind of style they have. But usually, even if you get an interview, they'll tell you what to expect. If it's going to be a type of question where it's focused on data structures and algorithms, or if it's more generic questions, stuff like that. So it definitely depends on the company. They choose, what way they want to interview. I think that at smaller companies, very small companies, it's more like quiz style, what is polymorphism? And then, at the bigger companies like Facebook, they'll ask you the inverse of binary tree or something. So it all depends.
Okay. I think we can go to the next question. It doesn't look like there's okay. Yeah. So next question is, how would you advise people to prepare for behavioral interviews?
I definitely think one of the things you can focus on is having a really good elevator pitch. I've talked to a few people who say, I always hate the question, tell me about yourself. That's usually how an interview starts. It's, hello, I'm whoever, tell me about yourself. A lot of people, they don't really know what to say. And I say that is a perfect time to throw in your elevator pitch. So for those of you who maybe never heard of one before, you can imagine, you get into an elevator with Bill Gates or someone, really big and really famous and rich, and you have an entire elevator ride, however long that may be, about 30 seconds or so, to pitch to them who you are and why they should hire you for whatever position. So you have a short, sweet description. The way I like to separate it is step 1, identify your goal. Step 2, explain what it is you do. And step 3, tell them why you're unique. And if you can put those things, it doesn't have to be in that order, but if you can put those 3 things together and be able to give that off in about 30 seconds to 45 seconds, then I think that's a great way to start. And once you've prepared your elevator pitch, you can start to break it down and think about how you can incorporate things that you've done before into answers you may get. Everyone can expect those questions of tell me about yourself. What do you do on your free time? They might point to experiences and ask you to explain it. So these are all part of the behavior half of it, where talking about a time where you XYZ, where you had to work with a team member who didn't want to do anything with you, things like that. And you really want to think about how you can exemplify the points you make in your elevator pitch into those kind of problems. Really think about, they're all, in my opinion, I've seen that they all tend to focus on the same ideas. So tell me about a time you experienced failure. Tell me about a time one team member just wasn't on board with what you were doing. So these are very common problems people run into when you're working in groups. And just think about reflect on these things early on, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. Reflect on these things early on so you're not really surprised when someone asks you tell me about a project that failed, for example. So these are all very general questions that are always asked, at least in my experience. So come up with that elevator pitch, use that as a base plate to explain who you are, and think about how you can incorporate those elements into all the questions that are asked.
Yeah, and you're always going to get the tell me about yourself. Even if it's a technical interview, they'll ask you to introduce yourself. So that's definitely, if there's any question you want to prepare for, that's
I just don't be afraid to sort of be yourself. Obviously, you have to sort of adapt a little bit to the context of you're interviewing for a job. So don't, maybe use tons of swear words or anything like that. But it's okay to sort of throw some jokes in there, maybe swear a little bit, read the crowd on that one. But I think that, anything that you can do to make that person smile or whatever is going to make you more favorable in their book. So don't worry about being kind of the total robot and reading off of the script.
Exactly. Yeah. And adding on to that, being yourself, and being a robot is exactly the point I wanted to mention, is that a lot of people will say, they'll be asked, tell me about yourself. And they'll just basically rehearse their resume. What school I go to, here's my experience, here's my projects. And then, but I always like to throw something personal in there. What do I like to do? I like to travel or something like that. I like to go camping or whatever. Say something personal, say something human instead of just robotic.
I agree with that completely. And when I was preparing for behavioral interviews, which was a while ago, I forgot there was this method, and I just looked it up, and it was called the STAR format. So when you get asked a question that you need to reflect on your behavior, and then everyone else says, kind of be able to give a piece of yourself in that, you start with a situation and you explain it, then what your task was, the action you took, and then the result. So if it was good or bad, it's not necessary, as long as you can identify the points and you understand maybe what you could have done wrong or right in a situation, and you can convey that to the interviewer. I think that all helps. And then while you're doing that, you sort of give them a piece of yourself like everyone else did.
Okay, thank you guys for that. Is there any?
Doesn't seem to be any questions.
There's one, but I think that.
Yeah, we can keep that.
Keep that for the end.
Okay, sounds good.
Layla, do you want to do this one?
Yeah, sure. So something that you might have to think a bit about, if you could talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you say? Or maybe just if you were in an earlier stage before you started applying, or maybe just in a general sense, doesn't have to be career related.
I can handle this one pretty well, because initially when I graduated high school, I went to university, but for sociology and not computer science. And then after that, I realized that computer science is what I wanted to get into, and that's how I ended up at the college. So the first thing I would tell myself would be go to computer science right away, because I was scared of it. But then the second thing I would think would be, and something I experienced when I went back as a more mature student, was to just take your time now. When you're in school, I think is the best time to just sort of buckle down and focus. Make sure you understand everything. Like I know, and I did it. Like having a great social life. I mean, you come of age where you can start going out. But I would say if you put that on hold, or even maybe split your like 80-20 uh, split on that one, rather than, I guess, like the first time when I went through it and I breezed through university. I think when you really buckle down and focus and you take the time to understand everything now while you have the resources, it's going to pay off tenfold in your professional career. And then you're going to be able to do whatever you want later. Whereas not focusing as well and not taking the time to do extracurriculars and not like exploring the things in your field while you're surrounded by the people in your field all around you, I think is like a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I can go next. I think one great piece of advice is, and you've probably been told it often, but you're gonna have setbacks. Everybody has them. So like today, I just got a Snapchat memory a few hours ago that I saw that I was in New York City 3 years ago today, interviewing for an internship at Bloomberg, and it was the first time I'd ever gone to like an on-site interview. They flew me to New York and stuff, and it was really cool. And I ended up getting rejected. I actually ended up getting walked out of the interview early. Yeah, they have that weird process where like if they don't think you're a good candidate by the second interview, they just walk you right out. And I remember feeling like really upset about that and pretty devastated about it. Like it was a huge knock in the confidence. I don't know. And then just a few months later, I grinded for the next few months, and then a few months later, I got internship offers at like GitHub and Google and Tesla, all in like the span of a few weeks. So like, and I could give a million examples of this happening. You're gonna have setbacks, and it's gonna hurt, but like every time, if you're ambitious, you'll bounce back, and you'll come out even better than before.
As Eric, I would say to myself, don't be so bummed about not getting into Waterloo, because those guys are a bunch of jerks anyways.
I'm sure a lot of us have felt that.
Definitely say one of the things I would probably tell my 18-year-old self is learn C. No, I definitely think I should have explored more when it came to computer science, and specifically exploring languages and actually taking the time to fill my curiosity, because I was always curious. When it comes to computers, I have curiosity about the most random things, and that's how I learn. But somewhere along when I started university, I still had that curiosity, but I never really investigated things. I used to, like, for example, I'd be playing Call of Duty, and then, you update the game. If any of you have it on PC, when you update it and then launch it, it says, well, the update requires you to restart the game. And when I was really young, I used to think, okay, well, you can't completely kill the process for it to be able to start back up on its own. And then, as someone who would be curious, I would actually go and understand, okay, how do you actually get a program to restart itself on a kernel level, on an operating system level? But when I started university, I jumped into materials engineering because I wanted to do nanotechnology and things that worked with materials. But I was so focused on what is basically chemistry that I basically put computer science away, and I didn't like it, and I actually left the program because of that. And so I definitely think I would tell my younger self, keep that curiosity, keep trying to learn more, and fill that mind for computer science, because at the end of the day, I will eventually choose that anyway over what I was already studying. So I somewhere along the way, I sort of lost that need to understand more, and I kind of just enjoyed having questions. So definitely always being curious and always looking to find answers to the simplest things can take you a long way into learning how things work.
Yeah. One more thing. Do we have time?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One more thing I would add is kind of adding to what Simon said, like extracurriculars. You mentioned it at the end. In my first and second year, I was like, I did not focus on school at all. I was hanging out with the wrong students, and I didn't really care about anything extracurricular wise. And then all those students I was hanging out with ended up dropping out, so I was the only one left. So I had to find a new friend group. So surround yourself with first of all, I'm kind of branching off now, but surround yourself with great people. Like, you hear this all your life. You probably heard it as a 6-year-old. surround yourself with great people and people who want to succeed, and that will help you so much. But the original point I was going to say is extracurriculars. For example, hackathons. I always heard this word. I never went to one until like late in my second year or third year. And because I was always nervous, like, I don't know, like I've only done what I've learned in school. I don't know how to make projects. I don't know what I would make. But I ended up just going with a group of friends, and we ended up grinding out a really cool project. And then like you go there, you meet a bunch of recruiters and stuff, and then you get that kick started. And just doing all these extracurriculars, for example, Computer Science Society, I'm wearing my sweater right now. That's another great example. Just get involved. Go to events. Don't just do the bare minimum, which is your classes. Do other stuff during your university experience.
That's a great point. And this question, I know we have a wide range of students here today, so not necessarily that we're our target audience is 18-year-olds, but just kind of a way to self-reflect. So even if you have any advice for people moving forward, if anyone wants to add anything, then that works too. But just a reflection question. But if that's all for this, then we can move on to the next and last question, I think. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience today? So any last words on your end, and then we can move into the Q&A.
I would say similar to what Eric said, which is like, but maybe repurposed advice. If you don't be worried about not being good enough to apply for like an internship or a job or anything like that, especially for like the first one. I think the best method is sort of just like spray and pray. Do you know what I mean? Like every tech company that you can know the name of, like Google that thing jobs and apply. And like don't worry about if you get an interview and you like bomb it totally. Don't worry about it, because I think every interview that you do, you'll sort of like get more the hang of it. You'll be less nervous next time. Do you know what I mean? So like, just don't worry too much about failing, because as far as I know, I've never heard of any companies that dock you for failing the interview and like reapplying later. Like I applied to Google 3 times before I got in. So like, if they're doing that, they're not doing a good job of it. But yeah.
Yeah. To add on to that, you can imagine if you apply for, especially at big tech companies, if you apply for a position, hundreds of people, even if it's just double digits, like 30 people are applying for this position. So you really shouldn't put yourself down so hard if you don't nail an interview, because sometimes you do really well in an interview and it's just they had someone better. That's okay. There's always going to be someone better. You're always going to be better than someone. And so I would definitely, just to add on to that, is, don't put yourself down so hard. You got to spray and pray. You got to keep trying. And something else I'd like to add is, I know not everyone is likes public speaking. Some people are they very much like to keep to themselves, and that's okay. But I would definitely say making the effort to reach out to people, to ask them about the role they do. I think it's a great way to network. I've reached out to a bunch of people, say, hey, can we just have a one-on-one? Tell me about what it is you do, what's your day-to-day like. And these people remember you, and it keeps you in mind in good faith as well. So I would definitely say try just to have one-on-one chats. And one thing as a side effect of that is you get better at speaking. You get better at meeting strangers, which means you'll do better on the interview when you're meeting strangers and they're asking you a bunch of questions. So definitely one step at a time, meeting new people and trying to grow your network. It builds your public speaking skills. It builds your ability to stand out there and show confidence. And I think it'll be a good way to get your foot in the door as well.
I agree completely. Something that, like, when I first started and I was interviewing, I had a job like locally, but I was interviewing, I wanted to go big. And I would do an interview and I wouldn't get it, and I would feel awful. And it's like I couldn't get past it. And then you get like imposter syndrome. You don't know what's going on. You think you had the skills to do it. The job description sounds great. And then as I go on, I realized like I had some really, really good interviews, and then maybe didn't like the offer. And then more recently, I've had interviews that haven't went as well as I would have liked. And now I don't get upset. I actually like it, because each time you interview, even it could be the smallest company or it could be Google. you always learn something from that interview, and you have to be able to take something away from that interview and then take it to your next interview, and then you're just going to keep climbing after that. So to kind of go into the second point is I didn't go straight to a higher ranking job, and then I worked like a local small shop job, and I just gained experience, and then I interviewed and I realized what needed to happen. I started learning about algorithms and whatnot. And then once you hit that 2-year mark, it's almost like recruiters just come to you. Once you get that 2 years experience, so it's almost like you practice and maybe one of those interviews will stick in that 2 years. But then as soon as you hit that 2 years, you're kind of like you're sought after at that point. I think everyone kind of likes the 2-year experience mark, and then people start offering you jobs on like, and you're not really searching for them so much. But in that time, you gain your interview.
I swear, all the LinkedIn recruiters have a filter, at least 2 years, because right around that mark, I just started getting spammed out of nowhere. Adding another piece, like you're entering a field that's like very, very unique, where you could have like, it's the most random backgrounds. Like I've worked with people who have, their education was like a 2-month boot camp, or one of my coworkers, probably the most talented guy on our team. He was a biology major and dropped out in his first year of residency in med school, and now he's a senior software engineer here. And it's like there's so many different backgrounds and there's so many opportunities, and the compensation, it varies. You can make a ton of money. It's a very unique field where you can come in with so many different backgrounds and make something out of it. So I will say, like, it's a field where your school name and your grades aren't as important as a lot of people will say. So like it's a field where if you're ambitious, you can go really far. Like no matter what your background is, you can go very far. If you're ambitious and you just keep grinding, like there's nothing stopping you. So just kind of keep that in your head. Just keep focusing, keep working, and learning.
Okay.
Those are some great points. Nathan, do you want to take some questions from the Q&A?
Yeah, sure. So I want to start with this one because I think this one is the first one, and it's pretty important for students. But what kind of projects did you guys work on pre-internship? And I guess to add on to that question is, what kind of projects do you think are valuable to put on your GitHub or your resume? So, and if one of you wants to take it, and if any others want to hop in as well, we have a few questions to go through in a short amount of time, though. So.
Yeah, this is like something I struggle with a lot, and I think a lot of people do as well. They hear like, okay, to beef up your resume, especially without any experience, work on personal projects. I always heard that, and I was always like stuck, like, oh, I don't know what I want to make. Everything in the world has been made already. Every idea has been done, and in the end, it's just like, the ideas can kind of come to you naturally, where like you're just doing something and you think like, oh, I can make this a little easier. Like, for example, one of the first projects I did was a few years ago, I finally caved and got Spotify. Before that, I was literally downloading MP3s and adding them to my phone, and very, very ancient methods of getting music. And then eventually I was like, okay, I got Spotify. Now I have this library of like 500 MP3 songs that I can't use anymore. How do I get them over to Spotify? There was no way to do that. So I wrote a script in Python and learned how to use with like the Spotify API. And I take the name of these files and I search Spotify's API for a song and try to use some matching library to match the names and then add it to my library. So that's just one example. Like if you find something that can be improved with technology, just do it. There's no real type of project, I don't think, that like recruiters are specifically looking for. Just find something that you could work on and just do it. Like something that interests you.
Yeah, I definitely think one thing I've told people before, who say I have no experience, what do I put on my resume? I definitely think there's a lot you can do, especially, people talk about projects, but I always say, don't forget there's clubs and teams. You can do volunteer work. You could have a YouTube channel. You could do online classes, freelance, and tutoring. And tutoring was the thing I did. So even before I had any experience, one of the things I love to do is just teach. So whether I was teaching math or teaching computer science, I had a lot of experiences on my resume that were specifically, when I was in high school in grade 12, we started a math club. So that was, a club and a tutoring thing that sort of put into one. And I'd actually say for projects, not everything has to be coding project in that sense. Sometimes you can, projects can be things that you've taught or events you've organized that, has some tech, like a hackathon, for example. There's definitely, projects are a good way to show here's what I'm capable of doing. And Eric can go on about the different ways you can find projects to work on, because I definitely can't think of any. But projects are a good way to show your technical skill, but you also want to show your skills in other places and the kind of person you are. So things like teaching, YouTube channels, I think are stellar at doing this. And organizing events and things like that, I think are great ways to show people who you are outside of the computer, which helps them figure out whether or not you're a good fit for the team, which is ultimately what they're looking for.
Those are some great answers. And I think our next question kind of adds on to this. So some tips you would give for applying for your first internship if you had no previous experience. So I think, Michael, you touched a bit on that. And if we should focus on personal projects and highlight them on our resume, if anyone wants to just kind of give a quick follow-up.
Yeah, just focus on what you have, I guess. Like if you don't have a lot, you kind of have to do what you have access to. And I think you can probably, so somebody here said, don't make a mountain out of a molehill, but maybe make like a, Micmac Park out of a molehill. Like talk it up a little bit more than maybe it's worth. Not to the point where you're over exaggerating or anything like that, but you can sort of like hit on, oh yeah, I, tested it. I used this like external Spotify API, like things that will sort of like pull people's interest, right? Oh, it saved me 3 hours a week. Like, kind of try and mine the real sort of like, kind of like I said earlier, like the real sort of like end result of these things.
So much. Yeah, I think that was a great question and some great answers. We have another one here. So if a student already has 4 to 5 years of experience after pursuing a master's, can they apply for software developer engineer? I guess that's what that stands for. So basically like initial internship positions in big companies, or would that be considered as experience?
Yeah, so I think that's more referring to like a new grad position, I guess D1 or L3. So with 4 to 5 years of experience after university, can you apply to new grad positions? I don't think so. Most of them have like hard limits. Oh, it depends what your experience is. If it's tech experience, I think most companies would not consider you for a new grad position. You would be considered more experienced, whether it's senior or mid-level. But it really just depends on the company.
Google, when this comes in, I think they sort of like bucket you into interviewing as like an L4, which is one level above entry level. But when I give my feedback on how the interview went, there's actually a button for me to say like, I don't think this person's ready for level 4, but I think they would be a really great level 3. And so I don't know if you can explicitly ask for that, but at Google, at least, like the option is there to be considered for like the entry level rather than the other one.
Yeah, definitely. I know some companies will treat that, experience. If it's internship experience, for example, they'll see 4 to 5 years and they'll treat it like 4 to 5 years of experience. But other companies see internships as almost like lower weight. So if they see 4 to 5 years of internship experience, some companies I know might just treat it as, okay, this person's still basically entry level, but we might be able to expect a little bit more from them. So definitely, I think Quinn had it solid with the way Google does it. Maybe you can say, look at me as an entry level guy, or maybe look at me as a tier up guy. But I just know that sometimes they don't just look at the number. They say, okay, but was this all internships, or was this 4 or 5 years? Like you took a year off school to do a full-time position, things like that.
Okay. Let's see. So you guys didn't answer that. How hard is it to get into a STEP internship program?
I think that might be specific to Google.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't seen. Well, there are like similar programs like that, I guess. So
Yeah. Quinn, was it you or David that did STEP?
Neither of us
No?
did STEP, but yeah, I actually don't have honestly a ton of experience. From what I understand, it's like a little bit easier, but the main thing is that the expectations of the person once you actually do get the job are a little bit like you're expected to be a little bit less independent because it's for people who are in their first and second year and maybe don't have that sort of like knowledge set built yet. And at Google, at least, also you're partnered with like you work in pairs with another STEP person. So you have sort of like a partner that you can bounce ideas off of and sort of like pair program with.
And for context, for people who aren't aware, Google STEP program, similar to I think Facebook University, Microsoft Explorer. These are all programs or internships geared towards people in their first or second year with less experience.
okay, and how critical is it to apply for non-Fang positions as a new grad during application season?
I would say it's very critical to apply for non-Fang positions. I'm being honest, I've never really truly understood the whole Fang thing. Like, I get it; these are the biggest tech companies, but tech is very much in high demand, and that doesn't mean that the top 5 companies are looking to hire everyone who graduates. It means that there are a lot of companies, big and small, that have a need for someone who is technical. And if you're applying to, let's say, you just graduate and you're applying to Facebook, this is like graduating high school and applying to Harvard. You can think of how many people are applying to these different positions. I know at IBM, for example, the way they do a lot of their positions is there won't be one posting for each team. They'll say, okay, well, on the back end, we have about 30 teams that need a back end developer, for example, or a front end developer. So we'll make one job posting, and then people's resumes that come in, we'll sort through them and give them to the teams as they please, for example. So there won't be 30 different postings for one role. They'll sort of collaborate that into one. And so you can imagine how many different people are applying to this one job posting and who you're really competing with. But I understand that, people like to say, oh, yeah, I work at, Apple, I work at Netflix, and that is cool. And, they are high paying companies, but you don't have to start your career there. You definitely have a huge opportunity to apply to these other companies. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. There's a lot of really big companies that aren't part of Fang, but are still. IBM, for example, is not part of Fang, but we're the oldest of all the tech companies. And so I definitely say applying to non-Fang companies is huge, and you have a much greater chance of getting an offer there. But also, when you do apply to a Fang company, let's say you do get an offer, then you can compare that and say, well, there's this other company that might be paying a little more or might be paying on par. Can you pay me more than that? And you gives you some leverage to have those offers from different companies. And not everyone's going to get Fang first try. I know even with my almost 3 years at IBM now, I apply to Google sometimes, and most of the time I don't even get an interview. And so I can't, when I graduate, expect to just say, oh, yeah, let me just keep getting applications into Google and one day I'll get the job, right? I need to be realistic and say, well, there's a lot of other companies out there that need developers, that need technical people. I should be looking there as well. Video game studios, Rockstar Games, I saw was looking for a Python developer. AMD's looking for product managers, and it's huge. There's a lot of big and small tech companies you can apply to. I wouldn't limit myself to just 5 companies.
Yeah, I knew a guy who every summer would only apply to the Fang companies. So like 5 companies: Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And they would complain in the summer when they didn't have internships because they only applied to these 4 or 5 companies. So like Quinn mentioned before, spray and pray. Depends on the context, but most of the time that's the solution.
Okay. So those are some really good answers. This looks like the last question in the Q&A for now, and then maybe because the breakout rooms aren't working, maybe I can ask one, think of one. But do people mostly look at our portfolio of applications or other stuff that we've programmed that works, or do they mostly look more at resumes and so on?
Can't answer what people mostly look at, but in my experience, my GitHub is almost all private because the few things that I took pretty far were business kind of ideas, and they involved other people, and I wasn't given permission to, share code. So I almost never show any projects. I have a few other ones, just some simple APIs and stuff that if someone really asks for it, but a lot of times I tell people I don't have it, and they just go off of my experience and what I can explain from it first.
So I guess I can kind of branch off that question because I'm pretty interested on that too. Do you guys think it's worth it to maybe a section of your resume be like a GitHub link to something you've worked on in the past? And if you think that's valuable, how do you think you should advertise your projects the most effectively?
Yeah, I think it's like not specific to GitHub, but projects in general. Definitely have projects on your resume, especially early, as a student, as an intern or a new grad even. Projects are the best way. Projects and extracurriculars are the best way to make up for a lack of experience. So definitely have projects on your resume. If you have those projects on GitHub and they are public, also include a link to those.
I would definitely say
advertising. I think the what I said earlier is probably best, which is like the first person who screens your resume is almost certainly not going to click the GitHub link. And so you sort of need to have a few bullet points there that sort of like drives home why what you did is interesting, or and like why they should care about it and why that sort of like sets you apart. I think that's probably the key as far as like advertising it, at least through the first step. I think putting the GitHub link there is probably good for when your resume gets sort of like passed down the chain, and then the further people might click on it. But as far as getting your foot in the door, it sort of needs to have a bit of like verbiage around it.
Yeah, for sure. Like do both. Yeah.
I would say that. So one of the tips I give people on the resumes, I notice a lot of the time people have skills on the resume, like they'll say C, Python, Java, but then you won't see any of that listed in anywhere else in the resume. They'll say, yeah, I have Java as a skill, but nowhere else in the resume does it ever mention Java. And so I definitely say using these projects to provide examples to the skills that you have. If you ever seen those resumes where they'll say like Swift is my language and my proficiency is 4 out of 5 bars, and they'll have like 5 empty squares and they'll fill up 4 of them. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. How can I as a developer say, oh yes, my understanding of JavaScript is 3 out of 5? What does that mean? And so you want to stay away from doing that and focus on how can I use an example so that the person reading can assess in their mind, okay, this is how skilled they are with it. The projects are a good way to show, hey, I built this app using C++, for example, and they could get an understanding of the things you can do in that language versus people who just say I am 4 out of 5 bars good at C++, whatever that means. So I think using your projects, definitely, as Quinn mentioned, there's that that first screening where maybe they might not get the technical part of it, but you want to throw in somewhere any of those things that you listed in your skills so that the technical person reading it can say, oh, so that's their understanding of Go because they were able to use this and build this in Go. So I definitely think that's one of the tips I have to advertising your projects, is specifically referencing the languages, frameworks, everything that you use, so that when you say you're skilled with something, you can actually point to something and say, this is how skilled I am. I was able to do that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for those answers. It doesn't look like we have any more, and it doesn't look like the breakout room is going to be happening on here.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a good and bad reason why we had more than 50 attendees. So unfortunately, breakout rooms disable at that cap. So it's great that we had so many people come out today. If anyone has any questions to add into the Q&A, I think we have one now. If my target field is AI, how important is it to learn about software development skills, API building, model deployment, etc., along with the model development knowledge? Also, what should be the depth of those skills and how should I pick up those techs? Yeah.
I have a friend who is a Google developer expert in machine learning. And I've talked to him about learning AI quite a few times. And one of the things he says is that learning software development skills is practically fundamental to writing AI. A lot of people, he says, there's a lot of people in the industry who write really good code when it comes to AI, but then a lot of people in research who write really bad code. And it makes it very difficult to understand the research and understand what it is they're doing, how to reproduce it, things like that. And having an understanding of how the computer works and what computers are capable of doing, what computers are really good at, allows you to better understand certain models being used and why we do things the way we do with machine learning. And a lot of, when people think machine learning, people are so quick to just say, okay, I just got to load up Python and TensorFlow. But a lot of it does come down to your ability to write code, your ability to problem solve, and your ability to understand what is actually happening in the background. And this, I think learning those software development skills are very important, especially because I've seen really big projects in AI that can all just be done on one file, but sometimes you need to compartmentalize it and certain files have to do certain things. And so being able to break down your entire model into multiple files that do different things and having them come together correctly, I think is very important as well, because you want to write, as always, no matter what it is you do, you want to write clean code, and understanding software development fundamentals and understanding how to write programs, I think is a very strong way to do that.
I'll add on to that. I think it's important to delineate sort of like research and applied kind of like ML or AI. So like my team, for instance, owns an ML pipeline for ranking the people suggestions. And in our case, we do sort of like more as what is called applied ML, which is like we aren't writing new like, AI innovations or anything like that. We're just sort of using it as a tool to solve our problem. And when you're in the sort of like applied ML space, it's actually probably more important to know the other skills rather than sort of like particularly how the ML works. Like, I mean, that's definitely important, but sort of like setting up the infrastructure to support it is actually kind of like most of the work that goes in behind it, right? Like, you can train this model and it can be really great, but then when you throw like 1,000 queries per second at it, it kind of like falls apart. And when you update it, you don't have like a good testing process and stuff like that. So I think like that's actually probably more important in the applied space versus like if you're more interested in actually going into research and coming up with sort of like, I don't know, the next generation of ML algorithms, it might be less important, although it's probably still an asset to be like, kind of rooted in the practical sense. However, like in the sort of more research oriented fields, more important to understand the actual math and stuff behind it.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. We have another one here. When it comes to getting a job in game development, how okay is it to only have experience in making games on your own? So I think this kind of goes back to the whole idea of personal projects.
I definitely think there's sort of two ways I'm reading this question. You say, is it okay to only have experience in making games on your own? I'm assuming you mean you have experience making games, but never as part of a team. I would say that, obviously the best solution would be, to have projects where you're making games with the team, but as long as you have other experiences that exemplify your position in a team, like you are able to work well with others, collaborate with others on a bigger project, it doesn't necessarily have to be a game. And that is a good way of showing like, hey, I can work in a team. But one of the sort of big trends I've seen in tech is they are looking for people who are team oriented, who can work well in a team, because gone are the days where there's one person responsible for writing the task manager on Windows. Now it's entire teams that have to go through and building things. And so I would say having that experience of building games on your own shows that, you are capable, you have the interest. But I would say it's major to have other experiences, game related or not, that show that you've been able to work on a team before and that you can even take a leadership position within a team, because that is a very big part of, when you're working on a game, whether it's a AAA title or an indie game, you're definitely going to have to be on a team. And that's something that they want to see as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. It doesn't look like we have any more. So if we don't have any more, I think that we can wrap this up, right, Layla? Are we good?
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of you want to kind of put in your LinkedIn's in the chat to let people connect with you. They have any other questions? This is recorded, so we'll be posting it later on. But I think, let's see. Oh, we have one more. If you guys are okay to just hang back for this last question. This will be the last one. So Deji is a fourth-year electrical engineering student taking a minor in comp sci. Wants to continue to learn more about coding and get some practical experience. And what are some things that you would suggest for them to do to achieve this? Such as possibly continuing the computer science minor path?
I think it depends. I think it depends. Like if you want to pursue this as a hobby and just get some more practical knowledge, or if you want to pursue this as your career. If it's tough to say. I think that with a computer science minor, you might be better off taking that time and effort and just kind of use other resources or build projects or do something along the lines of that, extracurriculars, do some projects with teams or go to hackathons. In my personal experience, this is always a common debate whether the academic experience is more valuable than the applied experience. In my opinion, I think that rather than a minor, it would be better if you want practical experience. It would be better to do something like that. Attend a hackathon, work on some projects. Consider working on an open source project, something like that.
I think if you force yourself into something, like even if it's simple and you're just like, I wanna host a web page or something like that, and you set yourself goals and deadlines, whether you have no experience or a lot of experience, you're going to have to go get resources and learn things at that level. And I think the applied practice of that is going to teach you more than probably not specializing in computers.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Not sure if you have any final words, parting comments, but we really appreciated your input today. Thank you so much. I'm sure we all learned a lot. Nathan, do you have anything else to say?
I just want to say thank you guys for doing this. I definitely learned a lot, and it's really valuable to hear people working at companies that are like because you guys obviously put a lot of work to get where you guys are, and it's very valuable to hear your insights. So thank you guys, and I just also want to say thank you everyone for coming. And is there another slide on here? I don't know, but oh no, it's over. But yeah, so thank you guys for coming, and it looks like you guys are dropping your LinkedIn's in the chat, so connect with the talkers, everyone, if you want. But,
yeah, highly recommend.
The Discord, in the works.
Yeah.
Or use the Discord, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we're good. So I hope everyone has a good night. Yeah, take care, everyone.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Coming. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Bye.
No problem.